Shalom and welcome to Shikul Da'at. I'm Rabbi Josh Rose. Should a person of truth live within the confines of the normal and conventional, or is a commitment to truth incompatible with the limits of conventional life? This week in Parshat Naso, the Torah explores this question via the person who takes upon her or himself the Nazirite vow. We'll get to the details of this in a moment, but to understand the import of this curiosity, we have to understand the context. We are in the second Torah portion, I should say, of the book of Numbers, or Bamidbar, which is the name in Hebrew, which means in the wilderness. This book reflects a radical shift in religious experience that is much more akin to our own lives than what has preceded it. Up to this point, the encounter between God and the Jewish people has been immediate, overwhelming, and spontaneous. Think of it. Over the course of just a year, the Israelites go from abject slavery to a direct encounter with God and liberation. The Holy One breaks through the confines of reality to change the world, to transform a people, and then set the world on a new course. What the people know of Hashem is that God is a force that has liberated them, who manifests as a pillar of cloud and fire to guide them, whose thundering voice breaks through terrifyingly to draw the people close. God's presence is immediate and overwhelming. I've always sensed a tinge of tragedy as we move to the book of Numbers. The special and divinely ordered world recedes into the background, and ordinary reality takes over. There's a sadness, I think, in the familiarity of that transition that the Israelites now face. You and I don't live in the book of Exodus. We live in the book of Numbers. We live in the wilderness. In this book, God takes a step back, so to speak, allowing natural events to unfold in ordinary life. An evocative midrash makes a surprising connection between this change and a verse from the creation story, where the Torah says, "And God divided between light and the darkness." And the midrash says this refers to the generation that left Egypt and the generation that entered Eretz Yisrael. In his introduction to the book of Bamidbar, the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, explains, the book of Bamidbar chronicles the transition from the direct divine providence of the early years to the less blatant divine providence that followed as they approached Eretz Yisrael. This is the meaning of the Midrash that states that the verse, "and God divided between the light and the darkness," refers to this generation that left Egypt and went into the land of Israel. The Netziv illuminates the Midrash. God's overwhelming presence is represented by light. And that light was present in the book of Exodus. But now, in the book of Numbers, that light fades, and the Israelites wander in darkness. They have to face the challenge of living in the ordinary world with all of its difficulties, with all of its unceasing routines. And this change is expressed in a new way of relating to God, one for which the Torah has been preparing us for months now, but which now commences. The people encounter God through the confines of a highly structured, highly repetitive, and prescribed way, according to clearly defined rules. From the God of the plagues, the splitting of the sea, and fire on Sinai, to the God of the tent of meeting, who speaks with Moses alone. In religious terms, the challenge of the book of Numbers is to live in freedom and to do so in accordance with the covenant and divine partnership to which they have committed, and to do this not within the realm of miracles, but in ordinary life. Their challenge is familiar indeed. That is the background against which we meet the Nazir. So here's what the Torah says about the Nazirite. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, Deber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta elehem, ish o isha, ki yafli lindor neder nazir lahazir l'Hashem, mi yayin v'shechar yazir, chometz yayin v'chometz shechar lo yishte. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if anyone, man or woman, explicitly utters a Nazirite's vow to set himself apart for Hashem, he or she shall abstain from wine and any other intoxicant, shall not drink vinegar or of wine or of any other intoxicant, neither shall they drink anything in which grapes have been steeped, nor eat grapes fresh or dried. Throughout the term as a Nazirite, he or she may not eat anything that is obtained from the grapevine, even seeds of the skin. Throughout the term of the vow as Nazirite, no razor shall touch his head. It shall remain consecrated until the completion of his term or her term as Nazirite to Hashem, the hair of the head being left to grow untrimmed. Throughout the term that they have set apart for Hashem, they shall not go into where there is a dead person. Even if their father or mother or brother or sister should die, they must not defile themselves for them, since hair set apart for Hashem is upon their head. Throughout their term as Nazirite, they are consecrated to Hashem. In this book of the ordinary, we are introduced to a person who seeks to go beyond the ordinary. The Nazirite makes a commitment to avoid certain pleasures, to avoid contact with the dead, even family, and to allow their hair to grow. They act and look like outsiders so they can be holy to God. I want to suggest that by reading the Nazirite passage, as is commonly done, as some kind of curiosity for which the Torah makes a brief tangential concession, we miss a profound challenge of religious life that the Torah wants us to notice. The Nazirite passage is highlighted by its placement. It is the last law addressed to the people Israel concerning their behavior and their choices. Immediately after this, the Kohanim, the priests, are instructed in how to bless the people. And then the tabernacle is inaugurated, which is to say that regular religious life of the Jewish people begins, and it hasn't ceased since. So, why is the Nazirite so often ignored, given pride of place just before the inauguration of the tabernacle, this profound moment of transition? To answer this question, let's start with one of the puzzles of the Nazirite. At the end of the period of their vow, in the bit that follows what I read, but I didn't read, the person is instructed to bring a sin offering. Now, that's strange. In what way has the person who has just fulfilled a self-imposed commitment to higher religious dedication sinned? Shouldn't she be regarded in the opposite way? The curiosity becomes the leaping-off point of an important disagreement among our rabbis. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in his commentary on Parshat Naso, nicely captures it this way. This discussion of the sin offering, he says, led to a fundamental disagreement between the rabbis in Mishnaic, Talmudic, and medieval times. According to Rabbi Elazar, and later to Nachmanides, the Nazirite is worthy of praise. He has voluntarily chosen a higher level of holiness. The prophet Amos says, quote, I raised up some of your sons for prophets and your young men for Nazirites, end quote, suggesting that the Nazirite, like the prophet, is a person especially close to God. The reason he had to bring a sin offering was that he was now returning to ordinary life. The sin lay in ceasing to be a Nazirite. Rabbi Sachs goes on. Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar and Shmuel held the opposite opinion. The sin lay in becoming a Nazirite in the first place, thereby denying himself some of the pleasures of the world that God created and declared good. Rabbi Eliezer added, from this we may infer that if one who denies himself the enjoyment of wine is called a sinner, all the more so one who denies himself the enjoyment of other pleasures of life. It is easy to miss the profound implications of this debate. I don't think it is about asceticism per se. The Jewish tradition clearly rejects asceticism in favor of a middle path in terms of enjoyment of the world that God created. I think what the rabbis really disagree about here is whether Judaism encourages a radical perspective on ordinary life or whether it rejects it. Rabbi Elazar suggests that the Nazir is like a prophet. The prophets were people who were terrifying figures, outsiders, who were enemies of the ordinary. Things that seemed perfectly acceptable to the average person were revealed by the prophets to be untenable moral horrors. Think of Isaiah condemning the religious conformists of his time for trampling the poor on the way to make obligatory offerings at the temple. The compromises of ordinary religious commitment were held to be, in Abraham Joshua Heschel's words, fraud and illusion. The holy place is doomed when people indulge in unholy deeds, he wrote. The Nazir, according to Rabbi Elazar, tries to ascend to the level not of prophecy itself, but to a radical religious commitment. The Nazir becomes other, at least temporarily, and from that position can gain a new perspective on the world of the ordinary. Rabbi Sachs explains the opposing perspective, that there is something inherently sinful in becoming a Nazirite. He says, that the Nazir is a person whose religious ideal is one of seclusion, and the spiritual and moral rejection of society compromises the ethical commitments that we all have. How can you honor your parents, care for your children, support your spouse, and strengthen your community if you are on a religious path that takes you away from these things and even rejects them? Well, I can't argue with that. Monasticism has never been the Jewish ideal, and Rabbi Sachs's insight is a powerful way to explain the rabbi's discomfort with the Nazir. But it leaves unanswered the question as to why the Torah makes this provision just as the Israelites are about to begin this new phase of a more regular life. Perhaps the Nazirite serves as both a warning and as an inspiration. I would argue that now what is most urgent is not the danger of the average Jew forsaking the commitment to family and community that are so central to a holy life. It certainly does happen and can be heartbreaking for those involved. But I think the more pressing danger for all of us is that we are so comfortable with ordinary communal life, including ordinary religious life, that we have lost the critical perspective of the outsider, of the prophet. We settle too easily for religious mediocrity, for half-truths that accommodate themselves to the choices we've already made in our professional lives, in our communal lives. We accept too readily falsehood and fakery in our own lives and in public life. We are satisfied, in short, with far too little. Yes, it's true, life is difficult and has to be lived day in and day out. We can't make a life out of screaming from the mountaintops about the world's problems, but let's be honest, that's not the only option and not the real danger. We should instead spend far more time guarding ourselves against the spiritually deadly danger of ignoring the Nazirite's demand that we live closer to purity, closer to truth. The Torah places the story of the Nazir, of this truth-committed outsider, just before the inauguration of ordinary life, as a warning and as an inspiration. Don't walk away from everything, but don't accept the world as it is. The Torah needs the Nazir, and we do too. Have a great Shabbos. Thank you so much for listening.